In the latest versions of Visual Builder, we now allow you to switch your theme to be dark mode or OS dependent. Dark mode gives you this black background, which a lot of people find easier to work with. This also applies, by the way, now to applications. So if we were to create, for example, an application like that, by default, the application is going to be created with what we call the light background, which looks something like that, right? If you click over here, you have the menu, which is black, but the main area of the page is kind of off-white. But if you go to the application settings now, you'll find an option to switch your application to be dark mode or to have a user choice option. And then you can set the default for your application. So let's use a user choice with a dark mode and go back to our page. And if the user now goes over here and switches to dark mode, the application becomes dark. So everything in terms of functionality is the same, but the area on the page has a dark background. Now this would work for your application as you develop it. So for example, if you were to take and add a list into the page, for example, I'm going to use a layout just to show the poster as an image and use the title here as the default slot and maybe the release date as the trailing slot over here. Click finish. What you would see is that your list is actually rendered with the dark theme. And we can make our image a little bigger, like that. And you have a dark theme application. And this, by the way, applies to other pages that you add to your application. So for example, if you're back on our list view and you do a quick start that allows you to edit the page or edit a movie, okay, then this now functions where you click and edit a movie. You go to the new edit page. The edit page is also already set for you in dark theme, and it applies across your application. By the way, if you were to take another component, for example, maybe you had a select component that you needed here and you drop it in, it would also be dark automatically out of the box. Okay. Now, this is the default look and feel of the dark theme. This is achieved by us using CSS for that. But if you want to change it, you can actually override the defaults. So for example, if we go into the movies application settings, we can create an override for the light theme and we can create an override for the dark theme. So let's create an override for the dark theme. We'll go over here, we have an empty CSS and a node that tells us, hey, you need to bring in some CSS variable to define the behavior you want to see. So if we'll take this URL and just paste it in your browser, this would take you into the Jet documentation where we document all the CSS variable. And over here, you actually have samples of all those variables that you can change. And you can do searches on here to find what you're interested in. For example, if you were interested in modifying how a button looks like in your application, you can use the section over here that talks about buttons and modify it. So this is the button section. If you wanted a higher button, you can take this line, for example, go back to the override that you created, paste it here, remove the comments, and for example, say, hey, we need it to be a higher button with a 4.75. If you now go back to your edit movie page, you would notice that your button is now bigger, okay, higher. This, by the way, applies across your application, so it's going to be the same thing for the button that is on the item start area over here. Now, one thing, by the way, that is worth mentioning here, in the new application template, we also have this slot over here for buttons. In a lot of cases, it would be good for you to take the buttons, for example, this edit button, just move it over here to the slot. We found from our usability testing that for a lot of customers, this is easier to find buttons when they are up here. Right? So it's actually quite likely that we don't want this change in size. It just makes it looks a little strange. But there's other things that you can change for a button. For example, if we now look at the button in the regular size, okay. So this button, for example, you can choose the type of chromating that it has. So if we were to say, hey, this is a call to action button, okay, we can change the way that call to action button looks in our application. Again, go to the CSS over here. If you scroll down the section that talks about buttons, we have covering borderless and outlined buttons and all sorts of buttons, including the call to action buttons. So let's copy those 3 lines of CSS, paste them over here. Okay, and we can uncomment the background color and the text color, and we can then modify this. So for example, maybe you decide that your background color should be blue for button, and maybe the font would be yellow. This is definitely not a recommendation, but that's just to show you the functionality. If you now go back here and refresh the page, okay, once you click on something, the button becomes enabled and you get the coloring over here. Right? This, by the way, again applies to other buttons in your area. Okay, if we now do a refresh here, okay, you can see this is again a call to action button has the same coloring. Now you can run your application, and when the application comes up, again, you can work with the application over here, and your user can actually decide that they want to see the light theme without actually having to do anything to the application. Same functionality is still available here, and as you click through your application, you're going to have it working with a specific theme that the user prefer, whether it's light or dark over here. And again, you can always change it back or rely on the operating system to control this for you. So that's the new dark theme for applications in Visual Builder.